welcome into the first episode of the PantherExtra Podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Petrik. Joining me, Waterloo-Cedar Falls Courier sports editor Jim Nelson. And we're going to get right into it today, and we're going to talk about a column you wrote earlier this week, or late last week actually, on the West Gym. Could you just give us a quick synopsis of kind of what's going on around the West Gym before we get into the discussion of maybe what generated the column?
Well, really, what it comes down to is the wrestling program has almost completely had to move out currently right now. It's because the building is deemed unsafe. The engineers won't certify it to allow people to be inside there. The UNI wrestling program has moved out there working at the Mat Club in Cedar Falls. It's over by Pepper's sports bar, and that's where they've been for a little more than a couple of weeks. They actually moved a lot of their equipment, training equipment, and that's where they're doing their preseason workouts at, where they're getting ready for this 2023-24 season. And it's a sad story, and there's two sides to it, it's just unfortunate. It's unfortunate, and right now doesn't seem to be no clear plan on where they're going to practice right now. For on campus, they're practicing off campus right now. They're a Division I program who's consistently ranked the top 20 in the nation, and they don't have a home right now on campus that is certified or completely safe for them to work out in.
And that was something that came on my radar almost instantly upon joining the Courier back in February 2022. I think maybe the second month I was on the job, I got a phone call from a concerned wrestling fan about what was going on with the West Gym. I didn't even know what the West Gym was at the time. I think wrestling season was over. I had heard about the Iowa State duel in the McLeod because they talked about it at the press conference that I was at. I think I wrote a story about it even. And that seemed like it ended up just being kind of like the test run to see if they could move competition from the West Gym into the McLeod Center. Kind of cheated because you're going to pack the McLeod when you bring in a state school like Iowa State. And so last year they ran their competition in the McLeod Center. I guess I don't understand because I never got to experience it. What makes the West Gym a special, not only training center, but place for competition?
Well, I'm gonna go back a little bit because I have a lot more institutional knowledge than you do on this situation. So one of the first events they ever held in the brand new McLeod Center was UNI against Iowa wrestling meet, and actually head coach Doug Schwab was on the Iowa staff at this time, went back in the early 2000s when the McLeod Center opened, and it had a nice crowd. But flash forward now, what makes the West Gym special? It's hard to say. It's been around forever. Back in the late 80s and 1990s, that place was an incredible home venue for the UNI volleyball program, where they hosted NCAA championship events there. And when you went to UNI volleyball, so to put point reference, now it wasn't 92,000 like Nebraska had last night in Memorial Stadium, but you could put 2,000 people into the West Gym, and there'd be 2,000 people for a UNI volleyball match, and you were on top of the match, and it was hard for opponents to come in to win. And so it's got a long history. You go back, wait to the 1950 NCAA wrestling championships were held inside the West Gym. So there's a little bit of background on this. And so when Doug Schwab came here and replaced Brad Penrith as the head coach, he made the West Gym, their home. Everything was going to be their home. He made it his mission to make that place special again, to pack it. And he not only talked about it, but he did it. And on a consistent basis, when they had that place of rocking up, there's an Oklahoma meet that I can talk about, and it's probably one of the loudest I've ever heard it in there, where UNI rallied to win, and that place was rocking. It was just amazing. They made it as a unique testimony, or a unique atmosphere. Schwab joked frequently that on big match days he'd go. It's heated by not a furnace, but like steam, and he'd go turn them up so it'd get hot, so it'd get even hotter in there. And then you got 2,000 people in there, and it got even hotter. And so I sat up in the crow's nest where heat rises, and it was hot, and it was loud, and and a lot of times you saw opponents wilt. And so they really made it. He made it their home. It's where they trained, and that was their identity. It's gritty. It's old. It's old building. It's 100 years old.
Yeah, I think actually NCAA Gymnastics National Championship, Division II National Championship was held in the West Gym in the 40s. I remember seeing a little on this day sort of fact on Facebook, and they had pictures in black and white. And so yeah, it's been a notable venue, not just here in Iowa, not just amongst the Cedar Falls wrestling community. It's been an iconic venue on the campus for a long time, and that's kind of where I hit David Harris, athletic director of UNI, last year when they announced the Art Tomorrow campaign. He talked about how the focus of that campaign was to really, focus on and improve and keep these iconic spaces around, is the terminology that they use. They kept using iconic spaces. And I said to him at that press conference, I said, well, you talk about iconic spaces, and it's very evident talking to our readers that an iconic space at UNI is the West Gym. I asked him, I said, are you guys going to, obviously the Art Tomorrow campaign's for the Unidome, but is there any plan to get money going towards the West Gym? And he just said, no, there was no discussion on getting money headed towards the West Gym. And so it certainly seems like, from the outside looking in, UNI doesn't really have any plans for the facility, and especially so now that they've moved the team completely out of there for training even.
Yeah, that's it. And I know there's been some higher up meetings in recent weeks, including one last Friday. It's time to follow up, see what the plan is, where they're going to move them. I tell you what, if we got Doug Schwab on this podcast, I tell you, he would lay down the law. But I think they would prefer the program. I think he's taken it. They're accepted that they're going to be inside the McLeod Center for competitions, but they'd love to train still in the West Gym. But is that the right, here's where, the rock meets the hard place a little bit, is it worth putting the amount of money that they're going to have to put in to make the walls safe, the roof safe, everything, so it can be certified. It's got to be certified. It's got to get the right permits to allow people back in. Mm-hmm. And right now, engineers aren't going to grant that. Engineers and and consultants, the people that make those decisions, aren't going to let that happen, as I understand. So it's a real shame, when they were building the McLeod Center, they held a lot of men's and women's basketball games in there. So I mean, it's got a special, it's just got a lot of special meaning to a lot of people, but in particular to the wrestling program. Without a plan too, and they talk about, the administration talked about to put a little bit, pressure on them, is less than a decade ago they put more than $1 million into this facility. Mm-hmm. To help to better the locker rooms and some other improvements in there. And, they raised that through the wrestling fans. And now they're wondering was this a waste of our money? Mm-hmm. Because you talk about how you've known for years and years that the West Gym needed these repairs, and now we sunk more than $1 million into it. So there's a little bit of, stunned, the boosters are a little bit stunned, the wrestling boosters are a little bit stunned by this decision that there isn't a plan now. And if that had been the case, would we been asked to put that money somewhere else? Mm-hmm. But, like I said, Doug Schwab has made it. I called it gritty a year ago when I wrote a column, and it's a gritty place, and that's what he calls his team. And I can't use how he described that, but he reaffirmed he liked how I called it. So gritty. So.
Yeah, and $20 million is the number cited by UNI on what the renovations to the walls and roof are going to cost at the West Gym. That was 2 years ago, I believe, that number came out. So obviously there would probably be a new number if they were to actually move forward with any plans or try and get some real firm plans going on the West Gym. So I hear about it. I hear you talk about it. I hear fans talk about it, and just Coach Schwab, you can ask him a couple of questions about it. You don't want to get too far in a press conference on the West Gym with Coach Schwab, because he'll get, he'll tell you, he'll call you out. He's like, you're trying to get me pissed off. So you don't want to piss him off. But it's certainly a shame. I certainly feel like I missed out on something, not getting to experience a meet there. But the resolution to this situation is not out there yet. We don't know how it's ultimately going to shake out. And so I guess there's a little bit of hope in that.
There's some hope there, and there's a lot. I think there's some ideas been thrown around. For many years now, they've been talking about doing a standalone basketball, because practice facilities are really at a minimum. This is where their problem is coming right now. Is they have a lot of practice places that they could go to. There's the PEC and the WRC over there. However, men's and women's basketball, volleyball, they all want to use these because McLeod Center's got one basketball floor. Mm-hmm. So one person can practice there at a time. And so what they're running into is practice time. And so if you move the UNI over to the WRC or the PEC, they're going to have to put their mats down and bring them up. Also, how can you regulate the heat? Because when you go to a wrestling room, it's hot, because that helps them lose weight. That helps them with their weight training. So how you can do that? So they would have to put the mats down and bring them back up, put them back down, bring them back up. Who wants to do that day in, day out? So that's part of the issue right there too. Where can they? I think they have spots that can go. And Pete Morse, who I talked to, Director of Community Relations with you in Northern Iowa, Director of Relations with the University of Northern Iowa. He said there's a lot of options out there, but where can they find one where the wrestling room can just call it home, where they don't have to do those things? I think that's where they got to go to. Moving past that, I know I'm really long-winded here, is there has been a plan for the men's and women's basketball standalone place. Can they fold the wrestling room in so they can put a wrestling room in there too? So there's more practice space. That would be a different fundraising thing. So, and they're going to have to go, again, they're going to have to do another capital campaign. They're already in the middle of one for the Unidome, and now they're going to have to go. So are there some wrestling boosters that come up and they're going to divvy up $20 million? Or maybe they can get $10 million out of some wrestling boosters and build a standalone place now that's brand new. They can do it. Obviously, University of Iowa's building one right now. It's in close to $30 million project. I think that one probably cost more than anything because they had to connect it to the Carver Hawkeye Arena, where I don't think the new one will be attached to the McLeod Center, but they'll find a space where they could build something if they do. If that's one thing. So I'm thinking they could probably do it for half the price of what Iowa's doing, or if they might be able to do something for $5 million. Anyway, it's a hefty price tag, and where's it going to come from? Where's it going to come from? So there's just no resolution. Obviously, we've been busy with prep football and the start of college football, so I haven't been able to follow up on this story, but Doug Schwab is anxious. He's got no hold of him, and he's got some words he wants to communicate on what he thinks he would like to see happen. So.
And certainly, so keep your eyes on the Courier, either on the website or on the print edition, because the moment we get word from Coach Schwab, that'll be something you'll want to read on this topic. And we talk about the WRC. That is also a student recreation facility. You don't want to monopolize a student recreation facility 100% of the time of the day, because you are trying to use that as a service you're offering your general student body as well. When I was a student at Nebraska, we had a full turf field, a full rec facility with a full pool, multiple racquetball courts, multiple weight rooms, 6 basketball courts. Three of the basketball courts were in the old volleyball coliseum, which was connected to the rec center. So it's really interesting to kind of see the talk of a program at the opposite end of the spectrum, where we had all of these things that you and I need just available to the student body. Athletics wasn't really using them at all. When I worked for the track team, we would maybe rent out the turf field for 3 hours a day, but that was it. Otherwise, and students would come in there and stretch, throw the football around while we were throwing javelins on the other end. So it's wild to kind of just look at this from that perspective, where I'm coming from a university that has it all, and just to kind of see how a university that maybe isn't as well off financially is working through it. So I certainly I have a little bit of empathy for the people at UNI with what they're trying to do, and understand that they're playing a different game than some of these other schools in the nation.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, it's a problem. I really think the UNI officials they want a resolution. There's been some missteps, I'm sure, along the way that they wish they would have been more proactive. Maybe that when they put that $1 million plus in there a few years ago, they wish they might have maybe did it something differently. But like I said, Doug Schwab has built his identity of that program around the West Gym, and now it's not available to him. And so what's he going to tell his recruits now? If we can't practice there, we got to compete there. What am I going to show my recruits when I bring them on campus because we don't have a home? Mm-hmm. And so that's where part of it, that's where he's come from too. So it's a tragic situation right now. Hopefully they come up with something really soon, so they can at least have something to say to recruits to keep the train rolling down the tracks for the Panther Wrestling Club.
Well, not even recruits. In the current world of college athletics, you're recruiting your roster every year too, and so you got to have something for your athletes too, because you don't want to see any attrition on that roster that Schwab has built or worked so hard to build, and it is a very high quality roster at UNI. So certainly something to keep an eye on as well there. Mentioned we're getting into college football season. We'll go ahead and shift gears, looking at college football. Cyclones, Panthers do battle in Ames on Saturday. I went down to Ames on Tuesday to talk with the coaches and players of Iowa State, and they had some interesting things to say. I don't know if you saw all of my tweets. I did a lot at that press conference. Got some new gadgets that I wanted to try out, so I was maybe going a little crazy with the tweeting during that press conference. But one thing that struck me is, we're here 3 weeks ago writing a story about Theo Day being the best quarterback in all of Iowa, college quarterback in all of Iowa. And I didn't think that was an outlandish take. And then we talked to Iowa State players and coaches, and they have respect for him, but they don't seem to fear him at all. And you don't know what's going on maybe behind the scenes. Maybe they're a little bit more concerned, but really projecting confidence in that program. Is that something that surprises you at all, Jim?
I think that's what they need. You need a little swagger to be good, right? You need to have swagger, and the crux of it is that their FBS program going against an FCS program. They should feel pretty confident that they can beat them. It's amazing when you talk to people who don't know a lot about FCS football how they don't respect it, and that's from players. That's from fans. They don't respect. If you get on the fan sites, the fans are all over it too. That Theo Day plays FCS. There's probably a reason why he isn't at Michigan State anymore. Well, he didn't get
the coach that recruited him got fired, and the coach that came in had his own guys that he wanted to play. He'd been there for 3 years already. And when you're at a college for 3 years, what good is your high school film? So he jumps in the transfer portal, and you and I kind of just gave him like a lifeline almost. And he has a lot of gratitude towards the coaches at UNI for giving him that. But that's ultimately why he ended up at UNI. Much more talented than an FCS destination would imply, but he has shown out, and it's paid off greatly for the Panthers.
Well, it's just amazing. If you look at, there's been an FCS player drafted in the first round 3 or 4 years in a row now, if not multiple. So the level, yes, they don't have as many. They can give away fewer scholarships. Yes, if the Northern Iowa had to go in the Big Ten and play 9 games or 10 games, they would probably go 0-10 a lot. They might pull one out, but that's the reality. But in a first game of the year where you got a month to prepare, facts have shown that this game is going to be really good on Saturday, and that's what I'm looking to see is a good game. And the fact is, there's talent at the FCS level. There's guys that can play football. They just happen where they fell through the cracks, whatnot. They can play football. So to have a disrespect for him and not fear about him, the first time he throws a pass, they're going to go. One thing is watching on film, but he's on target and he comes with zip. And probably harder than, with zip that they're used to seeing from their quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. So
when I was talking to a redshirt freshman linebacker, Carson Willich, he's listed as the starter at Sam linebacker for the Cyclones. He said, hey, Theo, he can throw the ball. We've seen that on tape, but we have a plan for him, and I'm confident we're going to be able to stop him. And I was really, really caught off guard by that confidence. And then Joey Peterson, senior defensive end from North Scott, goes and says, I think we need to stop the run. And that kind of goes back to how Coach Reeder likes to set up the pass. He has his little saying, run for yards, throw for miles. So he certainly likes to use the run game to set up the pass. But I just thought that was interesting that Peterson really keyed on the run game. It was like, hey, we need to stop the run game. Whereas I think most fans looking at it would say, hey, the Cyclones need to stop the pass. They need to hope that their veteran secondary can step up. Instead, they're looking at this super young front seven and saying they need to step up and stop the run, which I certainly would not have expected from him. So I certainly got a lot different quotes from that team, from the players, than I thought I was going to get on Tuesday. Defensive coordinator John Haycock, he started off with instant respect for Theo Day. He said, I think he's obviously an NFL quarterback. He can make any throw you want him to. And so I certainly think there's respect for Theo Day in that room, but there is a confidence that should, I think, make Cyclone fans feel good about their chances, because there are a lot of people saying they're on upset alert. But I think Panther fans should enter this game confident as well, given the disarray in Ames. Where do you fall on this game? Where do you think that we're going to end up in the fourth quarter? Is it going to be a runaway? Is it going to be a close game? I'm not asking for a prediction. I'm just asking you how you think this game's going to go.
Well, I think it comes out of strength against strength. It's UNI's pass game against their defense, which their defense is. If there's anything that's not in disarray in Iowa State, it's their defense, and they can play. And it might be one of the better secondaries in the Big 12 this year. They can led by TJ Tampa. It's a really good secondary. So they talked about. I read some stuff where UNI likes a lot of short game, but I looked last year. UNI scored 12 touchdowns last year in the pass game of 20 or more yards, and I think it breaks down to like 8 of them are like 30 or more yards. So they can sling the ball deep. They don't have the Quan Hampton or the Deion McShane anymore. Those really quick scat bats. But look at, I think Sergio Mortensen and Logan Wolf have got speed. They got top end speed. They can get when they get moving, they can run. Get Damon Houston, another one, and there's a couple other kids that, the true freshman. We'll see how much he gets to top play. I think so. It's going to come down how much can UNI's pass game, beat the strength of that of Iowa State's team right now, and then when you flip it, let's flip it the other way. UNI's defense was not itself last year. It wasn't a top 20 defense that it had been year in year out. It wasn't. How's that going to be? Can they take advantage of a youthful Iowa State offense that's lost a few guys because of reasons we all been talking about? They're going to be starting a guy that has no college reps, really, or very few. One of them, or they could be starting a true freshman. Can you rattle that guy? Can you get him off his game early so he's not as good as he could be? Because they're there for a reason. They're talented. So I think it's going to be a good game. The last two have been that way. I mean, it was a 6-point game in 2021 when UNI was a 30-point underdog, and UNI led that game into the second half, I think. And then in 2019, the triple overtime game. I think it's going to be a good game. I'm not a big predictor guy. I don't know what it is. Paper say you look at the programs and what Iowa State is and what they've done under Matt Campbell. They should be favored. They should win this game, but it's not as simple as saying Iowa State should win it, because UNI is going to come down. They're going to have a good plan, and they're going to give them a hell of a game, I think.
Yeah, and you bring up UNI's offense and what they have at wide receiver. They get Sergio Moranci back, and you they lost in Quan Hampton and Deion McShane. And I think you look early on, those guys were very impactful. They were big-time playmakers for UNI, but towards the end of the season, they kind of faded, and a guy like Sam Schnee came on, ended up leading them in receiving yards. Sergio Moranci comes on, leads them in receiving touchdowns. You mentioned Desmond Hudson, from the transfer from Iowa, who he kind of came on towards the end of the season, and he wasn't even on the two-deep that we got on Monday. And so you talked to Coach Gaines at Media Day kind of about the wide receiver room and the depth there. You mentioned true freshman receiver Jaden Ellis-Leahy. What can you tell us as you were working on that story? What did you learn about that room?
There's a lot of guys they like. I talked to a couple players, and they talked about Brady McCullough, a true freshman from Ankeny, and you know what? Joe Gans didn't even bring him up. He says he's got, when I asked about him, he goes, yeah, he's got a lot of talent. He's got some things to work on too. Another 6'4", 5 kid that can run. So I think there's a lot of depth there. How are they going to attack? What is Iowa State going to give them? But I think they got multiple options. I think the biggest question mark, and I'm sure you're bringing it up, is how's UNI's offensive line going to hold up? Because Theo is going to need time to throw the ball, especially if they want to go deep. The short stuff you can get the snap and get it out quickly, but how is that offensive line going to handle? If they have to get it, they got to go for a 15-yard pass. You can get a lot with the 5-yard passes and maybe break a tackle, but if you need a big game, how's that offensive line? And you talk about the run game too. When you look back to those two games, I think in the triple overtime game, UNI only rushed for like 34 yards, and I forgot to look up how many yards they rushed for in 2021, but it wasn't a lot. So a lot of the UNI's short passing game, as we talked about before, is their run game. So you look, Sam Schnee getting a 5-6 yard catch, that's a first down 6-yard rush.
And there were certainly times last year, and I wrote about it in my 5 takeaways from a couple of games, or maybe in some of my 3 keys to victory stories. But it felt like at times Coach Reeder was maybe losing faith a little bit in the run game and maybe going away from it a little too early. And there were times where I just felt like, hey, maybe a little bit more success could be found on offense if you stuck with the run game a little bit longer. Because you did have 2 guys in Vance McShane and Dom Williams who could run the ball very well. Both went over 700 yards last year. I think they averaged more than 4 yards, or 4 or 5 yards a carry. I can't remember the exact number. So 2 effective rushers. You lose both of those guys, but you bring in a transfer from UTSA and Ty Edwards. You bring a guy back in Harrison Baybui who rushed for, I believe, 3,000 yards his senior year of high school, maybe 2,000 at Bettendorf. Just an insane runner. He's really been focused on becoming a complete back. He has power, so it'll be interesting to see what he's added to his game once the lights come on Saturday. And then a guy in Josh Jenkins, who I get mocked for really being a fan of, but every time I go to practice, I feel like he's making a play. He's got really, really likable intangibles. I feel like he can make a lot of guys miss. He's got good speed, and he's a guy that I've seen them trying to mix in a little bit, and he's a guy that's drawn praise. Coach Reeder told me that Jenkins was perhaps the running back you saw the most growth in. I don't know. I don't know if that means he's flying past anybody on the depth chart, but it's certainly a good sign for his opportunity to get on the field here as a redshirt freshman out of Des Moines Lincoln. And then looking at the offensive line, I feel like, yes, we don't know who's going to be there, but you have an anchor in Jared Penny, you have a captain in Chase Aaron snapping the football, who you wrote a story about. You can check that out on our website. And I feel like they might not have like the game experience, but I feel like they have experience in that room, just in terms of being in the program, knowing what to do, going through practices. So I don't think it's going to be a growing pains sort of situation with the offensive line. What's your takeaway on just kind of where the offensive line is sitting?
I talked to offensive line coach Rick Nelson. He likes what he's got. And then you talk to Chase Aarons, you talk to Tristan Roper, and it's about, okay, Chase was pretty good. I'm going to play with two guards I've never played with. Trevor Penning. Jared Penning has never played with the guard, the left guard he's going to play with. There's a lot of communication. How do they gel together? How do they work together? That's what I think you really got to see, how they're going to work together. That's what they've been working. From the time I talked to those guys a couple of weeks ago to now, what have they done? Their communication to better. What have they done to work as a unit to be better? And then it all starts with Chase Aarons. This is, he started a handful of games in the spring season, but this is a different beast. There's going to be 60,000+ fans there. He jokes, and he likes to joke about it. He goes, if I don't, I better have the best pass completion percentage of anybody on the field on Saturday, and that means he's got to get that snap back to Trevor. Geez, I'm all over the place here, Theo Day. I just want to talk about Trevor Penny for some reason, but
that's your Globe Gazette editor coming out in you right there.
Yeah, so he's got to get that back, the good snaps back to Theo, so Theo can make quick decisions. So there's a lot there. That's one thing you really want to watch. I think that defense, they got some playmakers. A young, youthful linebacker, but I think they got some playmakers in the defensive backfield. They got some playmakers up on the defensive line. Their biggest thing you want to see what develops. How's that offensive line? They've lost, a couple of guys in the NFL now in the last few years. Spencer Brown and Trevor Penning, and now, wow.
Yeah, Trevor Penning going in the first round 2 years ago, and then even Matthew Vanderslice getting an opportunity in camp with the Indianapolis Colts. He didn't end up making the roster or the practice squad there, but still got that opportunity. You got to be good to at least be a camp body, as pro fans call it. But that offensive line is certainly a place to look at. You mentioned the linebackers as well, being young. I think I have trust in Tucker Langenberg, Josiah Galvin, and Ben Belkin to kind of take the next step there. Ben, he's been in the program for 3 years already. He's been able to study under all of those great linebackers that have come before him. I think just getting that opportunity is going to help make the transition a little bit more seamless, because he's got to see how a Spencer Kubelier operated. You got to see how a Bryce Flater operated, a Javon Brecky even. And so I mentioned that was my biggest question mark coming into the season when I talked with Colbert on his radio show a couple months ago. I don't know if that's my biggest question mark anymore. But yeah, I certainly think you can keep an eye on the linebacker core, because you're going to need them to make some big plays on Saturday. We'll go ahead and cut it here. We're right at that 30-minute mark. I'm going to go ahead and leave you off with, I'm going to go ahead and predict the final score, or the final of this game. I have UNI picking up its first victory against Iowa State since 2016. They're going to get to 6-16 in the series with the Cyclones. I'm confident in that. I think there's a little bit too much disarray, too much unknown going on with Iowa State. And you mentioned the defense starting slow last year. I don't think it's going to be a slow start. I was told by Alex Allen that the defense is much further along than they were last year at about the 3-week mark in camp. So I feel like they're a little bit more well prepared. Jeremiah Johnson coming back is going to be something that Iowa State has to deal with. And I think no matter who you're starting at quarterback for Iowa State, Rocco Beck or J.J. Cole, it's going to be a little bit of hell going up against a Mark Farley defense in your first ever start. So I'm confident in a UNI victory on Saturday. Go ahead and check out my preview for that game. That one's already live on our website. It's also available in the Thursday edition of the Courier with a beautiful presentation laid out by myself. So go ahead and check out that. But thank you for tuning in to the first episode of the PantherExtra Podcast. Have a good week.